Hi, this is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop, and you're hearing me speaking through an old tube V76 preamp, really warm and rich sounding. Wait a second, you're not hearing me through that at all. You're hearing me through a Neve 1073 with a slight bit of top-end boost, a little mid-range dip around 300 Hz, and a little bit of creamy low-end boost around 110. Wait, you're not hearing me through that at all. You're actually hearing me through this Avalon, very modern style vacuum tube, compressor, EQ, and channel strip. How can you be hearing me through all these things at once? Well, it's because I am talking to you through a Universal Audio X4. And today's first look is all about Universal Audio's latest entry to the Apollo line, the X4. This is kind of a mid-step between their older Twin line, which is probably one of their best sellers, and their rack mounts that are really meant for larger studios that need much more multi-track capability. And this is a new entry that's sitting right between the two of them, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the feature set here. But I also want to give you, for those of you who are not familiar with Universal Audio, the pitch for maybe why you should be interested in them. They are among the interfaces that I generally recommend to people depending on their needs and interests. And one of the most beautiful things here about Universal Audio is that they get you into the Universal Audio family of plugins that are powered by the DSP chips in these Apollo devices. And they are some of the best sounding plugins out there, emulating classic old hardware. And a lot of them will have a tone just when you turn them on. And like the analog hardware that they're derived from, they really give you a great sound fast. It doesn't take a lot of tweaking to dial stuff in. I spent all of maybe 8 seconds dialing in my EQ setting on this Avalon and the Neve, and of course on this V76 Telefunken style preamp, there is no EQ setting at all, but it still has a certain richness before and after. Let me get in my headphones so I can hear some of this stuff with you. And I'm just going to bypass now this Avalon, and now you're hearing the totally raw sound of my voice. And now here's the Avalon with just a little bit of treble boost going on here and just a little bit of compression. There's really not much of anything else going on here, but it's a pretty modern sound, a little bit of a kind of radio feel, pretty silky. And without it, I mean, our raw sound is totally fine. These are very good, clean preamps, but it doesn't get you quite as much beautiful juice as some of these models of some of the best preamps ever made. Let me put back on this V76. And now you're hearing me through this guy, and it's just a little bit of a satin finish on the voice compared to without it, where there's just a little bit less of that saturation. Bringing it back again now, there's just a little bit more of creaminess going on. There's just this golden silky thing happening that I like a lot. Having used a lot of this original hardware in the studio, all of these models really sound pretty much how I expect them to sound. And I've got to admit, I was skeptical at first, but way back in 2012, we did a pretty unbiased shootout of the Universal Audio Apollo, then in its first generation, against a multi-million-dollar recording studio with a Neve console and all this fancy stuff, back on the Input Output podcast. And having worked on producing that and hearing these things for myself before and after, I was pretty sold pretty fast. And so were the Input Output hosts, Jeff Sanoff and Eli Janney, two really reputable producer engineers. I've gotten to the point in my affinity for this Universal Audio stuff that my own brother is literally shopping for an interface while I'm recording this video. And he is talking to me about, oh, should I get this interface? And I could get these couple of boutique outboard preamps and compressors. Maybe that'll help me warm up my signal. And I told him, my own brother, just go ahead and buy a Universal Audio Apollo. So I really do legit like this stuff, and that's why I'm willing to partner with Universal Audio on a video like this one, where I can just show off a few of my favorite models. I mean, there's a ton of great stuff in here. The X4 itself comes with the Universal Audio 610 preamps, the Pultec tube equalizers, the 1176, the LA2A, a whole bunch of great stuff. Before I get too much into some of the models here, where I could talk about these all day, I want to give you a sense for what's new and different about the Apollo X4. What is different from the prior Twin series is that you got pretty much double everything. You got double the horsepower by having a quad processor here compared to the base Twin unit. And you've got double the inputs on the front for high Z elements like guitars and bass. You've got double the preamps. There's 4 combo jacks in the back, so you can have 4 of these unison preamps. And the unison preamps are really interesting because the unison technology allows you to record with no latency through some of these classic compressor, EQ, and preamp models, matching their original impedance and gain stage characteristics, giving you the ability to apply these effects in real time and commit to your effects, which is A, great for production and forcing you to make creative decisions that sound great now, and B, for saving on horsepower later. And there's a lot of horsepower under the hood here. This thing gets just a little bit pleasantly warm to the touch. There's some nice venting here, and it's kind of designed to be like an aluminum heat sink, but you can really feel the horsepower under the hood of this thing. A lot of the control here can happen, A, from your computer, the console program. So pretty much anything that I want to adjust on the hardware version, I can adjust really quickly here from the console. But I can also do a lot of quick navigation here using this main knob, which can become my monitor control. So it can control my volume for one of 2 headphone outputs. So you can have a different headphone mix and different headphone level for 2 different sets of headphones, and it can quickly become the volume control for any one of my 4 preamps or for any one of the 3 different stereo outputs. So you could use this kind of as the centerpiece of a studio, allowing you to drive 2 separate headphone Q mixes right off the 2 headphone amps here, recording 4 inputs at once, expandable up to 12 inputs if you're using a separate ADAT input device, and 3 sets of monitors using those 6 outs back here, or the 3 sets of stereo outs, each of which could go to a separate set of monitors, each with independent volume control. So you could have your big mains, a smaller pair of near fields, and then maybe a consumer style little monitor, all queued up together, all running off of this. So it can absolutely be the centerpiece to a pretty well-equipped production studio, but then it's also small enough to travel. And I think that's an interesting niche that Universal Audio is filling with this one. The Twin Series was really much more of kind of a personal production device where it could give you some extra horsepower for mixing with really great plugins without taxing your computer. And it could give you a couple of channels in to record for overdubs and basic stereo sources. But this Apollo X4 is really wired much more to be a collaborative device where you could be working with multiple musicians in a room together. You could be sending separate cue mixes to a singer in another room and have a separate mix for the room that you're in. And then it can expand into up to a 12-channel device where you could be doing remote recordings, taking this and an artist to a destination and really very quickly becoming a centerpiece to a mobile studio with all the kinds of bells and whistles that you'd be used to, including a talkback control right on here, a dim switch, obviously phantom power for all those channels, and the ability to have multiple monitor and multiple headphone cues off of the one device. But easily my favorite thing about Universal Audio and what they do is these plugins. Right now I'm talking to you through this V76 tube preamp. I think it sounds pretty gorgeous, and if I turn it off, the sound is still fine, but we've just lost some of that silkiness that we get back as soon as I kind of instantiate this guy. It's subtle, and you might not hear it if you're just on like the speaker to your phone or your laptop speakers, but on a good set of headphones, a good set of speakers, you're going to be hearing this additional saturation and silkiness from this guy. And each one of these really does have its own tone. Let's listen a little bit more closely. This time I'll go back to that Neve preamp module. And now here I am, and I've got a little bit of an EQ boost going, so it's unfair. But if I turn that EQ off, I think you'll still hear it. It has a little bit of mojo, just like you'd expect going through a Neve preamp. So here we are without it, which again is a totally fine, just dry, direct, clean gain sound. And then adding on this Neve preamp, it just has a little bit of that tone you expect out of a 1073. And I gotta tell you, I do tell so many people who are starting to get into music production not to worry and fuss so much about things like mic preamps. Mic preamps compared to things like microphones, room treatment, speakers, investing in yourself and your own skills aren't that big of a deal. But assuming that you've got good microphones, you have your room treated out well, you have good speakers to listen through, and you've worked on your skills, having some preamps to choose through can be a lot of fun. Let's be honest. I kind of rediscovered my prior love of mic preamps just by playing with a whole bunch of models right now, getting prepared to do this video. And as much as I still do tell people who are beginning, don't worry so much about preamps. Focus on those really big wins of getting good solid interface, getting a listening environment you can really trust, getting some microphones, and working on your skills. Once you have those things together, man, it is a lot of fun to play around with these. Let's go now back to the EQ on this. So I've just added some EQ. We've got a little bit of a bass boost here, a little bit of a mid cut here at 350, and a little bit of that silky treble boost that the 1073 is super famous for. But we can switch to a very different sound with a click of a couple of buttons. And here is just the basic vocal preset on the Avalon tube compressor and EQ. And all that's happening here is just a little bit of boost in the treble and a little bit of compression. Man, there's so many models here to choose from. Let me bypass all of these really quick. Getting back to our raw sound. And we can go down here to our preamps and channel strips and just see how much there is to choose from. Manley Voxbox. All right, Manley Voxbox here. This one, absolutely great hardware piece that I'm super familiar with using in the real world. And if I bypass it, you'll hear again, here is my natural sound, and here I am through the Voxbox. There's just a little bit of silkiness that happens before I start doing anything, which is kind of fun. And then I'm just going to grab a preset. Ooh, Joe Ciccarelli. He's got some presets in here. Let's use let's see if we can find a male vocal one. Basic male vocal. Joe Ciccarelli, great guy. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and ooh, this is not a ton going on, but really tasteful. Just a little bit of a mid dip here at 1K, a little bit of a boost here around 100 Hertz, and a little bit of a boost here around 10K. Bypassing it, here we are with our direct dry sound again, and here we are with just a little bit of sweetening through the Voxbox. I saw another friend of mine here in the preset section, Chuck Zwicky. Chuck Zwicky, great guy, great engineer. He is a dear friend and a longtime engineer for Prince, New York City guy. Let's see if we can find a vocal preset from him real quick. Warm male vocals. All right, let's give it a shot. Oh, this is a lot more going on. This is definitely something that is kind of designed to cut a little bit more through a mix. We're getting a little bit much more of a significant dip here in the low mids, and then a boost down at 70 and a boost up here at 3K. So this is something that would really maybe sit on top of a dense mix. A little bit more compression going on here too. So yeah, you can get pretty radical with these things pretty fast. And each one of these devices, when you push it in a more radical way, is going to have its own tone. Let's go back to the Avalon, which is just a much more modern kind of thing. Used to use these a ton on hip-hop sessions back in the day, and on pop sessions, you'd find these a lot. And let's just go into some of the basic presets here. Here's vocals with DS. Activate it. And here we go. This is nice, bright, tight, fairly kind of modern and forward. I feel a little hyped up right now in a good way. And just a world apart from, say, going back to our V76, which is just a lot more throaty, full, and smooth. And obviously, I'm not applying any EQ here. There was some significant EQ boost in that last preset, which gave it a much more radical sound. The cool thing about the Unison technology is you can track through these with zero latency, really committing your decisions and making great choices as you go along and saving on horsepower later. Or you can record through them in a non-destructive mode where you're just monitoring with this stuff. But I really encourage people, commit your sounds going in. Every step of the way, you should be making your recording sound like a finished record. And if you have a decent listening environment or headphones you really trust, and you have some experience under your belt, you can start committing this stuff. That's the way that people have been doing it for years and years and years. It's really only in the past decade or so that people got out of committing choices as they go along. It's something you might want to consider, as long as you're brave. All right. Universal Audio is not just about all of these great front-end things, but you can also load up some more significant effects like reverbs, and they have some of the most beautiful sounding ones I've heard. Let's go to reverbs and rooms. So you've got some totally classic stuff like the EMT 140 plate, the EMT 250. I mean, stuff like that is a ton of fun. I love the EMT 250 on some snare drum. It is one of the earliest digital delays, but it just has a tone that is really all its own and super memorable. You've got things like the Space Echo. You've got the Oceanway Studio Rooms. I'd love to play around with some of these with you, but I think it'd be a little weird if we were just hearing my raw voice with no instruments and all of a sudden there was a ton of reverb on it. Yeah, that would be super duper weird. Okay, so that is a quick tour of the Universal Audio X4 and what it and the Universal Audio software can do. Really interesting if you are in a place where you just need more of a personal workstation for recording and mixing. There's the Universal Audio Twins that are really kind of the 2-channel version of this. There's also the rack mount series, which there's even 8 preamp versions of those, and you can obviously expand any of the Apollo family by kind of ganging together Apollo devices. So you can get up to a lot of channels, or you can get something like this: 4 inputs, 3 different stereo outputs for monitor control, 2 different high-Z inputs on the front, 2 headphone outs on the front as well, built-in talk pack, and great as both the center of a project studio or the center control room of kind of a mobile studio where you could expand to up to 12 inputs by adding on an ADAT device, or even more inputs than that by ganging together multiple Apollos. If you don't need that many more channels, but you need a lot of power for mixing, the Universal Audio satellites are a great thing to look at, where you can just tack on additional horsepower to take the load off of your computer, stop having crashing and choking in the middle of your mixes, and just have access to some of the best sounding preamps kind of ever made, as well as some of the best compressors, EQs, reverbs ever made. Man, we could go a lot deeper in here. I could just set up a chain with 1176s, LA2As. I mean, there's just so many different things I could grab. Under here, under dynamics, if I bring up, say, the Teletronics LA2A, it does just instantly have some of that vibe that you'd expect out of an LA2A, kind of warts and all, even some of the noise level that you'd expect out of these devices, some of the saturation you'd expect out of them. Here I am just totally raw with none of the compression, and then here I am just dialing in a little bit this LA2A. And it does have that kind of grit and grain that you'd expect out of one of these. Maybe sweeten things up even more. Here's a classic, super obvious setup to use, just throwing an 1176 on after it. Let's boost our input here, roll back our output, maybe use a higher ratio, and then all of a sudden we have got this pretty classic sound going. Add on a Neve preamp, turn on the EQ, do a couple of quick tweaks, and all of a sudden we've gotten something dialed in that is starting to sound pretty finished, although in a kind of vintagey way in this case. Bypass all of them real quick. And we're back to just the naked sound of this Shure SM7B. Man, I like that Telefunken V76 too much not to use it more. So let me put that guy back on. And I hope this has been a fun little tour of the X4 for you. I hope you got a sense for where this sits in the Universal Audio line, and I hope you got a sense for what you can do with some of these effects. Did you find this video useful? Hit like and subscribe down below. Have you used one of these Universal Audio interfaces before? Have you tried out some of these plugins? If so, let us know what were some of your favorites. What are the ones that you're the most addicted to? And if you're just hearing them now for the first time, let me know which of these models sounded best or most intriguing to you. Big thanks to Universal Audio for partnering with us on this video and sending me this lovely Apollo X4 to try out. Thank you for hanging out with me. See you next time.